Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session on setting the scene of the Viva examination with Dr. Luke Fletcher. Now, Luke is one of the most intelligent trainees I've had the good fortune of knowing, and I am so grateful to have him here today to share his experience and knowledge with us so that we can learn and better ourselves. And from personal experiences, I have learned so much of him with regards to his kindness, resilience, and just his incredible knowledge base. Now, Luke's chosen charity, if I can just bring it up, is Beyond Blue, who do amazing work helping improve the lives of people affected by anxiety and depression. And I encourage all of you just to look after yourselves during this phase. And check out this charity that Luke is sponsoring today with his efforts. And thank you, Luke. Now, Luke, I thought the way we could run the session today is to have a conversation about your preparation for the Viva, your experience on the day, and any learning points that you could pass on to our trainees here today. And there are a number of them across Australia and New Zealand. And after that, Luke has kindly prepared 4 5-minute Viva stems. And I've got 2 trainees who have volunteered. So what I'll do is we'll have one trainee do 2 5-minute stems and then another trainee do another 2 5-minute stems. How does that sound, Luke?
Yep, sounds great. I'm very happy with that.
Yeah. So Luke, first of all, I want you just to sort of tell us about the challenges that you faced during your Viva preparation phase and how you managed them.
Yeah, look, thanks, Dan. And listen, I might just backtrack just for those who've just joined us. So I'm an anaesthetic trainee in Victoria in the Northwest Training Scheme. And this year I'm a BT2 trainee. And I was fortunate enough to have been successful in passing the primary examination in August and October sitting of last year during 2021. I think that, what my experiences of preparing for the written and the Viva have demonstrated for me was that it's highly likely that at some point during the exam process, you will face, or you may have already faced, a challenge or a setback that may make it difficult for you to get to the end goal of passing the exam. And there are a number of reasons this can occur. One is because preparing for the exam takes a whole year. So there's a whole year of opportunity for things to happen or go wrong. And life is happening around you, it doesn't stop and wait. And it's a dynamic process. Your resources that you would use to solve these problems are diverted into studying for the exam, and subsequently your ability to cope with these stresses is subsequently reduced. And these, I think, create a perfect storm for creating a scenario where you're going to have some problem that you're going to have to face in the preparation of the exam that may or may not be exam related. And so these setbacks might include things like personal or family problems, relationships, or maybe an unexpected death in the family, issues with, physical health, like, COVID-19, or mental health, including anxiety and depression. It could be a work-related incident, such as like a critical event at work, or maybe receiving negative feedback. And most importantly, these setbacks can occur at any time. They can occur during the preparation phase and even on the day of the exam. And they can be they can last for like a long period of time and affect, your ability to prepare for the exam itself, or they can occur maybe on the day of the exam and unfold in a matter of sort of minutes to hours. And while I think that, preparation for this exam is highly dependent upon your ability to prepare for the exam, understand the content and learn it and be able to give it back to the examiners, and also requires a bit of luck. I think an overlooked component of preparing for the exam is preparing to have to deal with some of these inevitable setbacks that may occur, and trying to develop strategies to try and approach that. And while I don't think that I'm an expert in this field at all, I feel like I've got a couple of examples to share with you today about how I prepared for my exam and some of the setbacks and challenges that I faced. And I'll hopefully be able to provide you with some good examples about what I did in those situations. And these may or may not help you.
Oh, that's a great introduction now, Luke. And I know that, for yourself during that whole Viva preparation phase, you had this moment where I think you were told to isolate. And that was, I was shocked. I just went, oh my God, that is the worst timing ever to have to go and isolate by yourself for was it a whole week?
It was about 10 days in total. Yeah. So it was quite a long time.
And just tell us like how you felt, how you managed, those emotions. Cause I know that, social isolation during this whole phase was incredibly difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, for background, it was about where you guys are at the moment, a couple of weeks past the written, and maybe about 5 weeks or so out from the Viva. I'm pretty sure I hadn't found out at that point that I had received an invitation to the Viva. I was just working on the presumption that I had been invited. That I was at work. I was in the change room. I took off one mask and put on another mask, but was without a mask for a sum total of about 4 seconds. And in the change room at that time, perhaps there was someone who had COVID-19. And so the paper pushers had decided that I was a close contact and had to go into to isolation and quarantine. Unfortunately, my partner who I live with and my other housemate are healthcare workers who also work in COVID-19 pandemic response. And it was deemed that sort of the best course of action for me was to go to hotel quarantine, the only form of isolation that I had to separate myself from them so that they could go back to work. And so I went into a hotel for 10 days. And that was, right in the middle of my, Viva preparation, where I was really just trying to get in the right headspace, trying to, perfect my content, and delivery. And I feel like that significantly affected my, preparation. To paint the picture, it was a very small hotel room. It had like a bed, a tiny little desk about sort of 20 centimeters deep. It had one small little mini bar fridge and a small bathroom. It was sort of probably about 3 meters by 4 meters, kind of like one of those apartments that you might or hotel rooms that you might rent to go to an interstate city like Brisbane for the weekend or something. For something. It's not really designed to be living there for 10 days. And in many ways, I found that experience was kind of like being on a long international flight, except that instead of going for 18 hours, it went for 10 days. It was, you're on your way to a better place, that is leaving hotel quarantine, but you have to make do with the suboptimal conditions until you get to your destination. You're stuck in this confined space with limited fresh air. You might board the plane with strong ambitions of being productive, but you end up doing a lot of sleeping, eating, watching a lot of Netflix, just trying to get through those 10 days. I had this tiny little desk that is equivalent to a tray table on an airplane. I had no control over food or, what I ate. And my ability to stretch my legs, and go for a walk was extremely limited. Going for a walk and around the block was going to my bathroom and back. So in that process, time just seemed to sort of stretch, and I found myself being quite unproductive, and it was really difficult to study in those circumstances, and it became very stressful for me to have to be there while preparing for the Viva exam. Meanwhile, all my other colleagues around me were making good use of their time, and I felt like that precious time that I had was slipping away, and that I was not making gains, in fact possibly making losses during that time. And that was pretty difficult to be stuck in that situation for that time.
And I remember that I Viva'd you during one of those nights when you were in hotel quarantine. And I remember initially, I think it was at the start, and you actually saw it as a positive in terms of the way that you're framing it.
Yep.
You saw that, oh, this is great, going to have time away. I'm going to be able to focus on my studies and just have no distractions. But what you're telling us, it's completely the opposite, isn't it? So despite you having this positive mindset right from the start, and I think that is so important to know, is that sometimes, despite the most negative situations, we go in with this positive mindset to reframe that situation, but reality just sets in, doesn't it? And it is a really, really challenging set of circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, came in thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to get all this study done, 10 days off, what a dream, been given a lucky ticket here. But I think that it was really challenging because I was taken out of my normal routine, my normal environment, and I was imposed into this artificial environment that I clearly didn't, function very well in. And realizing that I had limited control over that situation, and just trying to manage that, I found a bit hard.
And if you had your time again, would you change anything? Because I understood you had the option, didn't you, of either going to hotel quarantine or staying at home?
It was one of those sort of pseudo options that it was potentially a possibility, but there would have been a lot of explaining to do on lots of different levels. I had my partner who works at one hospital had another housemate who works at another hospital, and both of them inquired with their workforce units, and they were already pretty stretched due to significant furlough in Victoria at the time. I think at that moment, yes, I could have potentially asked them to all stay, but as part of the response at that time, I think the only sort of viable option was to go into hotel quarantine. And unfortunately, because I'm interstate, my family don't live in Victoria, I didn't have anywhere else to go, like a granny flat or something out the back of someone's house. So that was I think it's difficult to know whether I would have made exactly the same decision again. I think I probably would have, but it wasn't an easy decision to make, I think would be fair to say. Yep.
Yep. And look, despite those challenges, I think your preparation and your knowledge base was so strong that I really felt confident that you were going to do really, really well in the Viva exam.
That made one of us, I think, Stan.
No, but I think and I think this is what we're going to get into in terms of the challenges that you faced on the day itself was another obstacle. But look, before we talk about that, I think can we just set the scene, because now, because of the whole COVID-19, the whole setup for the Viva exam is very different to, I guess, what's happened in the past. And I think that a lot of people here today just want to know in terms of what the setup is like, in terms of location, what you sort of experienced on the day.
Yep. Be happy to share that experience. So the first thing I might try and paint a picture from where you guys are at the moment, which, as I understand, is about sort of 3 weeks since the exam, the written exam, and probably another sort of 4 or 5 weeks or so before you're expected to sit the Viva. So it was around about this time that I was in hotel quarantine. I looked through my emails. I'm just looking up the timeline here. I went back and had a look. So at about this time, I don't know what it's going to be like for you, and I don't know whether my experience was any different because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the experiences and the limitations that imposed upon my exam. But it was around about this time that the examination committee notified us that in 1 week's time that we would be notified whether we'd have an invitation to the Viva. And 1 month after the written exam, which is roughly in a week's time, then I was lucky enough to be invited to the Viva examination. About 6 weeks after the written and 2 weeks before the Viva, I was notified of the date, time, and location of my Viva. And then 8 weeks after the written exam, I sat the Viva. The first thing to say is that, at least for me, this felt like quite a long time between, actually doing the written exam and staying in that mindset, that I had to, still prepare and keep going for this Viva, on the presumption that I had got an invite, and staying motivated over that time, can be quite challenging. And then the other thing that is important to note is that you are notified of the location and time, or at least I was, really quite late in the game. Of the 8 weeks that you have to prepare for the Viva, it's only 2 weeks out before you actually find out where it is. I found that to be also, a bit difficult. And then once I had the date and time confirmed, it was a bit easier. Now, I don't know what your Viva situation is going to be like, whether it's going to be in person or whether it's going to be, sort of a Zoom facilitated Viva. I'm not sure if you've been informed yet. For reference, I did mine in Melbourne in Victoria, and 2 out of 3 of my stations were Zoom Viva stations, with one station having 2 in-person examiners. In terms of the process on the day, obviously you need to confirm what location, date, and time was. Mine was at the Melbourne Convention Exhibition Centre. You arrive at the time that is listed on the email, which is about half an hour before your exam will actually begin. Probably arrive 10 minutes before that, just to be on time. At that point, you check in very similarly to your written exam. You hand in all your bags, wallets, phones, keys, anything else that you don't need. And for me, we collected headphones to facilitate our Zoom Viva. I think there was maybe a lanyard or some sort of identifier of some description that had your candidate number on it. And you got a free water bottle, which I promptly lost in the first station and, forgot about it. But they do provide you with water. Once you've checked in, you sit in kind of like this chair configuration of like a 3x2 chairs, or at least I did. And each row had 3 seats in it, and there were 2 rows. And then what would happen is the 3 people in your row would alternate between stations 1, 2, and 3 in the Viva, and then the other group would have another set of stations. And so there were 6 stations, in my centre running simultaneously. And so the people in your row would share your Vivas, and then the other row would have a completely different set of Vivas. So you sit there in this chair configuration, just patiently waiting. You get met by the local exam coordinator who wishes you well. We had a video from the primary exam subcommittee chair that also wished us well. And then from there, we were brought into this large exhibition hall. So each station was 6 stations happening simultaneously, were created as sort of sub rooms using temporary divider structures. So there was no ceiling at the top. So you could throw a ball, between, from one station to the other if you really wanted to. And then from there, you could also hear other people that were, talking around you, although a lot of the time you just got focus in your station and all that other white noise just disappeared when you're in the station. When you go into the hall, then there's a stem that's on the door, and what you do is you'd stand with your back against the stem, and then when the exam officially began, a bell would ring, you'd turn around and the stem would be on the door. And then in my exam, we had additional reading time for the Viva in order to get the Zoom technology to work. So I think historically, they've been given 2 minutes of reading time with the stem on the door, then 20 minutes of active time inside the station, and you have a total of 3 stations. So the whole exam goes for just a little over an hour. Inside each station, there's 4 topics, and each topic goes for about 5 minutes. For our Viva, the difference to that structure was that in addition to the 2 minutes of reading time that we had outside the door to read the stem, we had another 2 minutes inside of reading time and preparation time in order to make sure that the Zoom technology was working. So you'd go in, plug in your headphones, make sure that you can hear the examiners, they can hear you, that you can draw on their iPad that they've provided, and that they can, show you diagrams on the iPad so that you could interact properly. And then if you're in person, you just have another 2 minutes of reading time, or just sit and chat. I remember that in the in-person examination, there were 2 examiners, and there was a large table that sort of separated us, and there was a lot of sort of loose leaf butcher's paper and pens, and in each of the rooms there was a copy of the original STEM question inside, which you could refer to as well.
And look, with the face-to-face, were you wearing a face mask or no face mask?
We were wearing face masks, yep. And I don't think we had to wear face shields. We were sort of a bit socially distant, sort of 1.5 meters between the invigilators and the examiners.
So you were actually doing a Viva with a face mask on?
Yep. You could take your face mask off for the Zoom exam, but I had my mask on when I did my in-person Viva. Yep.
And just for everyone to know, what time was your Viva?
2:30 in the afternoon.
And from your other peers, it ranged from morning to the afternoon. Is that right?
Yeah, I think the first cab off the rank is maybe 8:30, and then last one I think was about 4:30 in the afternoon. So you need to factor in, I guess, food, water, coffee, sleep, around about that, and try and figure out how best you're going to, be optimized on the day. to make sure.
And that whole session would run for 2 hours in terms of the three, like having to do a 20-minute Viva, which sounded like you've got 2 minutes reading time, an additional 2 minutes of checking whatever. So about almost 30 minutes a station.
Yeah.
But then there would be a break in between. Is that right?
So for us, there was no big break. For instance, it wasn't like an intermission. We just cracked on. But what you would do is you do a full 20-minute station. And then from there, you would leave that station. And as soon as that station had concluded, you'd leave and commence 2 minutes of reading time for the next station. And then another 2 minutes after that, a reading time for Zoom preparation and check to make sure that was working okay. And so that total time between active station was 4 minutes.
Right. Okay. So this is very different to the one that I think I've heard of in the past, or the one where I experienced, where we did ours as a morning session. And then after that, you had like an extended break and then came back for another, in your second Viva in the afternoon. So this one sounds like it's just literally one after another. And I think it's a really good thing to sort of practice moving forward, just doing sort of one Viva, second Viva, third Viva.
Preparing the stamina for that is actually quite taxing. And I did find myself quite tired at the end. Certainly my experiences of the written was also the same, in that I'd been preparing to do like a 3-hour short answer. And then I was also separately preparing for, a 3-hour multiple choice. But I actually, forgot to practice 3 hours of multiple choice and 3 hours of short answer all on the same day. And I'm sure that those of you who, remember that, probably or may have found it as tiring as I did. By the end of the day, you're pretty cognitively fatigued. And the same experience is in the Viva if you haven't practiced doing a full Viva run, in a little while. So it would be good to practice that before you go in on the day.
Now, with the video conferencing, was it through Zoom or was it through another app? Yep,
it was through Zoom. As best as I can tell, this was the setup. There was 2 simultaneous Zoom calls, which you didn't have to set up. They set it all up for you. But one Zoom call was between a computer that you had and a camera in front of you and the headphones that you brought in and plugged in. And that computer was connected to the invigilator computer with their microphone and their camera, such there was a face-to-face conversation. But simultaneously to that, there was a tablet that you had in front of you. And there was the invigilators could, I think, probably had a second computer that was connected to that tablet. And that allowed them to present diagrams to the tablet that was in front of you without it affecting the Zoom call up here. So I think there was probably 2 meetings that were occurring simultaneously for each station. And the examiners would share their screen on Zoom and show you a diagram using OneNote. And they could flick between tabs and they could show you a diagram or show you a blank page. And then from there on your end, you would annotate the screen using the Zoom annotation tools. And then you could highlight a diagram, you could, annotate it, or you could draw an entirely new diagram on a blank, screen on the iPad.
How big was the iPad, just out of interest?
It was probably like a 13-inch device. It wasn't that big, probably like about this big, certainly big enough, like an A4 size piece of paper, possibly a little bit.
Not an iPad Pro, was it? It was just
no, it wasn't a big device. It was, again, probably about 13, like a normal iPad size, not one of the big iPad sizes. Yeah.
And did they give you an Apple?
It wasn't an iPad. It was more like a Surface, I think, or it was a Microsoft based one, and it had a stylus, more like a plastic stylus, more so than a professional sort of pen that you could use for illustrating.
Right. Yep. And so, but then when you draw it, you could actually see it on the tablet itself, as well as being.
No, so you couldn't see the diagram on the screen, because I think that was a separate Zoom conversation. You could just see the faces of the examiners, and that was static. It didn't change. And then on the device itself, you could only see the OneNote that they were presenting, and you could annotate on it. And their face never appeared on the tablet, and your content never appeared up there. So I think there was 2 separate meetings that were occurring simultaneously.
And how did you find the overall experience of that setup?
I think when things run well, it would have worked fine. There's a slight audio delay And so I'm sure you guys have found this in your own practice with Zoom, but you do often need to stop and wait for an opportunity to be asked a question, and it's very difficult to be interrupted. So that's quite different from an in-person exam where the examiners can cut you off and move you on to another question if you're wasting time. It therefore highlights the importance of strategy in the Viva, of saying something succinctly, sharp and short, and then stop saying words so that the examiners can ask you questions to direct you to where you need to go.
I mean, that's an excellent point. So just to reiterate that point, you'd recommend that whatever you have to say, make sure that it's set within 15, 20 seconds. And that way it just allows the examiners just to continue on.
Absolutely.
Now, how did that compare to your face-to-face experience?
I found the face-to-face was a bit more personable because you could form sort of a connection with them a bit more easily. And I got a bit more warmth from the in-person examiners. I felt that the Zoom Viva was a little bit more cold and clinical. But I feel like the ability to extract knowledge was pretty similar. So the ability to discriminate between a pass and fail was probably pretty similar. And therefore, I do think it's a fair exam, but it's just got a different set of rules, and you need to work with those rules, I think, in order to have success in it, if that's the sort of station that you're going to have on the day.
All right. If anyone's got any questions about the setup, please put them in the chat. And what I think we're going to move on to now is, I think, the challenge, of what happened. And this happened in your first Viva, which is why I think it's so important to share this story, just so that others can actually hear about it and learn from it. Yep.
I'll answer questions after we've done this. Thank you for the first question. So the first thing to say is that I feel like I had, done a lot of preparation for this Viva, and I felt pretty, confident going in. And so I stood outside my first station, back against the door, stem behind my head. The bell rang, and I turned around and I looked at the question, and the question, what is saturated vapor pressure? And I thought, fantastic. I know exactly where this is going. It's going to be on physics of volatile anesthetics. It's going to be about vaporizers. It's going to be about blood gas partition coefficients. I'd already been starting to formulate my opening line of what I was going to say. I had started thinking about, how a vaporizer works, and the drawing that I was going to draw, the order in which I was going to draw it, the points of the diagram that I needed to point out. And so I had a whole roadmap in my head of where I was going with this station, and partly because I'd seen this station before. I feel like Stan and I had done this probably from the hotel room. I'd seen that station before, and I thought, okay, I know where this is going to go. And even if it didn't quite go exactly down that way, I knew that roughly what the scope was going to be. I don't think that they were going to turn the station around and talk about cardiovascular physiology or something like that. So I just walked in thinking, yep, good, okay. So bell sounded, I went inside, we set up Zoom and sat awkwardly in silence for 2 minutes, because that was quite simple in this station. There was no problems, but the 2 minutes is there just in case something happens and you need to go and grab some help. So the next bell rings and the active station begins. I have 20 minutes. The examiners ask their first question, which is, have you read and understood the question? And I say yes. And I'm ready to unleash my opening line. And they say, what is tramadol? And at that moment, I pause, and I feel like someone's given me 12 milligrams of adenosine. And I just have this overwhelming sense of doom and dread. And I just think something's profoundly wrong. And it took me a few sort of seconds to just recover from that. And then I said, I'm sorry, I actually have a different question in front of me. Your question is not the question that I've got. And they were a bit confused by that. And they were like, didn't really believe me, but I had the copy of the question in the room. And so I picked it up and I showed them, and I said, just like I'm doing to you now, on Zoom, I picked it up and I showed them the question in front of me, which is, what is saturated vapor pressure? And at that moment, they panicked because they realized that something had gone wrong, and I panicked because I could sense that this was not part of the plan. And then they started shuffling around pieces of paper, trying to figure out if they've gotten the wrong Viva or if they've been put in the wrong room. And, you know, I felt like an eternity passed, and, you know, the examiners weren't doing anything and I wasn't doing anything. And I could hear the noise of everyone else talking around me, you know, that the stations had commenced, that people were getting marks, and I was just sort of stuck on the start line, you know, unable to start. And I feel like, you know, I mean, it was so difficult to know just due to that time dilatation that occurs. But I reckon probably after about 30 seconds to a minute, I sort of said, I came to the logical conclusion, which was that I really only had two choices. And I said to the examiners, I say, you know, we're wasting time. I've got two choices. Option one, I can go outside and find an invigilator, or it's option two, we have to do your tramadol Viva. And I realized at that point that option two was actually the only option, because I realized that those examiners are actually only prepared to examine you on the stuff that they've got in front of them. Many of them wouldn't be comfortable Vivering, or they might not be comfortable in Vivering you something that they haven't really prepared and sort of winging it, especially because they've got standards to maintain in terms of their Viva. So I realized that going with their Viva was the only choice. And so I chose to, you know, with all the array of options that I had, to proceed with their Viva. But I did so without any reading time, 1 minute behind the clock, and with an overwhelming sense of dread and completely shattered confidence in my opening, you know, to my first station in my Viva, with the whole rest of the Viva ahead of me at this point, which was pretty hard. At that point, I could feel the cogs in my brain turning. I found that, you know, I had all this knowledge in my head, and I just couldn't, you know, get it out. And so while, you know, I, on a good day, could tell you about all the different metabolic fates of tramadol and all about ODMT and NDMT and CYP2D6 polymorphisms, and, you know, all of the various receptor affinities that all of its metabolic metabolites have, in that moment, I just could not articulate this properly. And so while I felt like I had adequately prepared for a lot of opening stems or questions, I realized that I was not adequately prepared to face a procedural error in my own Viva. And that really threw me.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is incredibly difficult, let alone for the first question. And, you know, look, you and I have done so many Vivas together, and I was so confident that you had prepared yourself so well. And as you said, you know, you ran through so many questions, and you knew how to deliver really eloquent, concise opening statements. And I think that that's where that sort of time pressure comes in, which sort of, I guess it sort of makes everything sort of fall off a cliff, because you, in your head, you're going, well, it's a 20-minute Viva and I've got a 5-minute stem, and the examiners don't know what to do. They're looking around. They don't have any idea in terms of, you know, if this happens, what should I do? And so you can feel the time sort of ticking away. And look, I think it's such a brave decision to sort of go, look, let's just crack on with the Viva, ultimately knowing that this is not going to be your best effort, but no fault of yours. And it's more so in terms of the circumstances that occurred. But I think, you know, sort of share with us, it's something that happened, and it's very hard to sort of let go at the moment, isn't it? Because it probably played in your mind, do you think, probably throughout the whole three Vivas?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it was, you know, it stuck in my mind. I mean, I feel like we study for this thing for so bloody long that you come to the end of this and you think, I just want today to go right, you know? And so when it goes wrong, you know, for no fault of your own, you know, you do feel affected both, you know, on the day, and it affects your performance the rest of the day, but also I was, you know, pretty upset about it for, you know, a little while. And I feel like, so just going through the rest of the Viva, you know, I stumbled through the tramadol station and sort of tried to pick up my feet a little bit with, you know, the questions 2, 3, and 4 inside station 1. And then the next sort of, you know, slight consequence of the drama followed, which is because this was a Zoom Viva. the Zoom examiners attempted to, provide a bit of sympathy and try to give me an extra minute, for the lost time that I had. But in the real world, the invigilators were trying to move me on to the next station, and I was made to feel like I was cheating by staying inside the Viva and trying to get additional points in that Viva without moving on to the next one. And so it was just this awkward, me being pulled off, from one station to the next, all while reading time had started for the next station as well. So I was now losing time in my next set of reading time. And I eventually, walked out of that station, walked up to the next stem, and I just stopped. And I realized at this moment that, things were just, spiraling, and I can't go through another 2 or 3 stations spiraling. I need to turn this around. Because I don't want to come back and do this exam again. And I don't want to study for another 6 months. I don't want to be I'm sure you're all a lovely bunch, but I just don't want to be studying, with you. I just want to get the exam over and done with. So at that point, I guess for me, in these situations, I'm not sure, what strategies work for you. But for me, I think, I had a deep breath. In fact, I didn't even look at this next stem. I just took, 20 to 30 seconds just to take, 4 or 5 deep breaths in, deep breaths out. I realized that there were lots of factors that were going wrong here, but many of them were out of my control and I couldn't do anything about them. But there were some factors within my control, and my performance in stations 2 and 3 were. So what I decided to do was just take a bit of time just to reset and calm down. And then from there, after about 30 seconds, I looked at the stem with open eyes and with a fresh mind, or as fresh as you can be after that. And fortunately, it was a question that I, was quite familiar with. I think it was classify antiemetics or something like that. And then from there, I thought, okay, I've got a structure for this. And then, managed to formulate my opening question, and then went inside and managed to deliver my opening question, answer to the opening question. And it was the correct question as well, which is a perk as well. So, got to the end of that, and overall stations 2 and 3 sort of picked up, but I was feeling very rattled from station 1's train wreck of a performance. I feel like, I got out and I felt like I'd done the best that I could do, and the rest of it was just in the, examiner's hands, and hopefully I would be okay.
I mean, look, that is incredible, because I think for most of us, including myself, I would have been completely lost, and I'm sure that, I might even have walked out. So, I mean, those are the kind of stakes at hand when you sort of think about this. And, the way that you dealt with it, taking a deep breath, sort of understanding that there were circumstances where you can't control, which is what happened in the past, and things that you can control, which is moving forward from the next 2 Vivas. Is that something that you had practiced before? Like, how did you know to do those things that you did?
I guess, I just innately did them. I think, and that's because I think I've done them with practice of times that have been stressful for me. And when Stan initially asked me to talk about this topic, I had a bit of reflection and tried to, make some sense of it all. And, I guess the conclusion that I actually came to, Stan, was that that dealing with, given the fact that we're, setbacks are quite common in the primary exam, and facing some small challenge, although, a procedural error on the day of the Viva is a very unlikely circumstance, but, setbacks are quite common. Having a setback during the primary exam is a little bit like anticipating to have to manage an unexpected difficult airway at some point in your career. It's almost certainly going to happen, no matter how hard you try and avoid it. And it may or may not be a disaster, but there are things that you can do to minimize it occurring, or to handle it if it actually does. And I feel like we go through simulation training about how to handle an unexpected difficult airway. And I guess, the point of today is perhaps to give you some parallels, in training about how to deal with an unanticipated, difficult airway, with how to, pick yourself up when you fall, when you're doing the primary exam. And so for me, the first thing is minimize the chance of having something that sets you back, make sure you know when your Viva is, rock up at the right time, make sure you figured out where parking is, and how to get to the venue. I remember in my preparation listening to Stan and Lahiru's podcast and remembering Lahiru talking about how he actually scoped out the exam venue the day before to know exactly where it was, and maybe that's something that you feel like you need to do. If you know where the venue is, that's great. But just minimizing the number of things that can go wrong on the day, I think can help. So, just like we do an airway exam and try and predict if someone's going to, be have a difficult airway, minimize the factors that will put you in the circumstance of, having a setback on the day. For me then, anticipating that you may have a setback, and thinking, oh, something might go wrong. Actually, I found, I think would have been helpful in that I was sort of anticipating that on the day, everything would just go to plan. And the truth is that it will if the sun is shining and the wind is calm and there's no clouds in the sky and things. But, the reality is that, that sometimes things do go wrong. And so I think if things do go wrong, you have to be okay with that and also have developed a strategy about, what to do. And so for me, my strategies are, as I've described, sort of slowing my breathing down, collecting my thoughts, identifying those factors that I can fix and those that I can't, and focusing my energies on those that I can fix. Thinking about the time when I was stuck in hotel quarantine, factors that I could optimize at that point were, for instance, like the room. I rearranged my whole room. I thought this layout doesn't work for me. I'm 10 days, I'm stuck in this hotel room, I'm going to make it my own, so I rearranged the desk, I turned around the desk, I made some room to, do some, sit-ups and things, in one corner. I'd have structure and routine in my life. I would, call my partner on Zoom at 6 p.m, we'd have dinner together via Zoom, just to create some routine and just to try and control factors that I can control. I was stuck in this room, but there were things within this room that I could still control to try and optimize my chance, for the success. And so in the moment of the Viva, the only factors that I could really control were, my feelings towards the situation, and, picking myself up for Vivas 2 and 3. And I hope that's, somewhat helpful for you guys.
Well, that's an incredible story. And thank you so much for sharing that, Luke. I mean, I think if there was a prize for being successful in the most challenging set of circumstances, specifically on the day, so far, I think yours wins.
Well, this actually happened to one other person, because the root cause of the problem was that they'd accidentally swapped the stems for 2 stations. So I'm not sure who that poor unlucky soul was that was paired with me, but if you're out there, then please send me a message and let me know how you're feeling. So, but we'll take a joint prize then in that.
Right. Yeah. Now, I think what we'll do is we'll go through the chat. I think there's a couple of questions there.
Yep.
And so one of the questions was, did you ever get to do the saturated vapor pressure Viva?
I did, actually. So what happened was I did the tramadol Viva, then I did the antiemetics Viva, and then I finally came back to the 3rd station, and that station had the question, what is saturated vapor pressure? And by that time, they'd swapped around the paper, so they'd corrected their mistake. So I didn't get what is tramadol and then walk into what is saturated vapor pressure Viva, although someone got the reverse. And at that point, I kind of felt a bit like, well, I've thought about this for a lot of time already. I don't think I need to spend that much more time reflecting on what my SVP opening is going to be. But, it's all right. 4 minutes, I thought I can get through this. So that's fine. So
now, one of the other questions is, when did you find out that you had passed? And I think you said this earlier, but if you could just answer that question again in terms of passing the written to be invited to the Viva.
Yep. So in terms of finding out that I'd passed or had gained sufficient marks in the written to be invited for a Viva, I found out about 4 weeks after I had sat the written. So I've got the dates here. I sat on the 17th of August and I was invited to the Viva on the 16th of September. So essentially 1 month minus 1 day later. And then from there with the Viva, you found out pretty quickly. They mark it, it's all marked on the day. So as soon as the examination committee have just looked through it and make sure that all the marks look like they've been entered, which usually happens on the evening, usually find out within about 24 hours of sitting your Viva. Certainly you might find out that you've passed before someone else has already sat theirs. And so you'll find out it's all rather anticlimactic. You just get this sort of email that just says, congratulations, you've passed, and kind regards, it's done. I was in the middle of doing, I think, 3 epidurals at the time, and none of them were going to plan. So it was rather anticlimactic, actually. And then that's it. It's over, and it feels very weird. That all this time and energy you've spent in preparing for this thing, it's all done. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. About 24 hours after the Viva.
Although you didn't tell them, Luke, that I predicted all this already beforehand, long before you even set the written, that you would pass easily. So there you go.
We'd all like your crystal ball, Sam. So if you're selling one, then let us know. So
they don't call me the Oracle for nothing. Anyway, so the second question is, the third question is, would you recommend a strategy on what to do during the 2 minutes of waiting time?
So my strategy that I found helpful was thinking about a very succinct, very comprehensive, but very targeted answer to the question. And if you can, add a little bit of flair to it to show that you know something more, but not much more. So for example, with the saturated vapor pressure question, I'd thought about something like saturated vapor pressure is the partial pressure of a vapor that is in thermodynamic equilibrium with its liquid form, and is dependent upon the physicochemical properties of the liquid and the temperature of the liquid. And so therefore I've defined it, but also have just started to introduce a couple of breadcrumbs of things that I want to talk about. And then they might, so tell me about how temperature does affect saturated vapor pressure. And they say, well, and then I can draw a diagram and, just go from there, So you want to answer the question and show them that something else. And that's a good way to, the opening line usually helps the examiners to know where you sit, whether you're going to, I think they know pretty quickly whether you're going to be okay or whether you're going to struggle, and they tailor the Viva to it. So it really depends on, how confident you are with the topic. In this case, I was quite confident with the topic because, again, I'm pretty sure, I'd gone through this Viva with Stan before. And then from there, if you have seen Vivas that have, with that opening question, remember how that they unfolded, and then remember what sort of diagrams you need to draw about, what sort of topics are important, and what are the things that you need to talk about when talking about this. For instance, the tramadol Viva, they're going to talk about CYP2D6 polymorphism. It's going to come up. So if you're starting with the question, what is tramadol, then, thinking about all the metabolic fates of tramadol and thinking about the various enzyme systems that metabolize it and the polymorphisms and the different types of metabolizers, having already thought about that, so it's fresh in your mind in those 2 minutes, is really helpful, because then you can just pull it out of that short-term memory as opposed to trying to load it up from long-term memory. Just try and postulate as to where the Viva might go, and then just try and bring that knowledge up to the surface. Now that only really helps you in question 1, might I add. But your pace and tempo of how you go with question 1 often gives you the confidence to attack question 2, 3, and 4. And so if you have a poor start with question 1, then it can have flow-on effects for the rest of the station, as I found out, in mine. I hope that gives you some clues of what to do in those 2 minutes and how you can use them to your advantage.
No, that's very helpful. Now, just quickly go through, there was one other question about, did the examiner release your invitation for a Viva earlier than originally said? And look, I'll answer this one. I think, Julia, yeah, they do say 6 weeks, but sometimes they do release it earlier. It just gives them a bit of leeway in terms of timing. So I think that don't expect it to happen at 4 weeks marks. Expect it to happen at 6 weeks, but it can happen earlier. Rowan asked, did you have access to pen and paper during the reading time, or is this all something you sort of thought about in your head?
there was really no opportunity to write anything. I don't think we had, I think I had a pen with me because I brought my own pen, but I don't think I had any paper to write on because the paper was inside the room. And also there was no flat surface, and the temporary dividing walls that were used to create the Viva were kind of like felt based. So if you tried to draw on it, like your pen would have just punctured any piece of paper that you had. So I think it's pretty safe to say that there's no writing outside the station. At least it wasn't for me.
Yep. And I think that was similar to sort of my experience, was that with the paper on pinned to the wall, it was all conceptually done in your head in terms of what you're going to mentally sort of say. Now, one last question before we head on to the Vivas. How did you structure your Viva study?
Oh man. So look, this actually took a long time to get right. And I feel like studying for the written is one thing, but then like converting your whole study plan to attacking the Viva is something completely different, and did take me a couple of weeks to actually, figure out. I feel like I just figured it out, and then I went into hotel quarantine. I feel like, I was just like stumbling on that. So I feel like that it was something that did take a bit of practice. So if you're still trying to find your feet, I don't think you're alone, is the first thing to say. What I found helpful was, first of all, accessing past repositories of Vivas so that you can ask Vivas amongst your friends. And if there's something that you didn't understand or know when you did a Viva, then go look it up afterwards. So when I did my preparation for the exam, a lot of it was on Zoom. And so we were pretty familiar with using Zoom at this point. So we would often set up Zoom meetings and Vivas maybe every like 2 or 3 days between my study group. And we just break up into breakout groups and just practice Vivas. We'd also got a lot of Viva practice from consultants at nearby hospitals. So Stan Tayer's Hospital, the Western, have a fantastic consultant group that do Viva preparation and practice with people. And I was lucky enough to be invited into that, and got, at least one Viva a week from the consultants there, and then combine that with a couple of other hospitals, a couple of other people. They offered me additional Viva practice. I was probably doing, at least, one good 20-minute, Viva station a day. So the Viva will help you to identify high yield topics that are commonly brought up that you should look at and know very well. Part of the difference between the written and the Viva is that with the written, you have 10 minutes to kind of pull the knowledge out of your head. But in the Viva, it really needs to be at the tip of your tongue. You need to have the definition, just there so you can access it. You need to have a way of classifying something just there. And so I feel like structure is something that you gain a lot of, in doing Viva practice, because structure allows you to get breadth, and breadth gets you points. Where if you narrow down too quickly, then you can miss out on the big picture, the points, or the path the examiner wants you to go down. Certainly there was Viva practice, then there was knowledge, study of areas of deficiencies, and then practicing definitions and classifications, and just going through those like, scales on the piano, repetition. Anki flash decks are quite helpful with that. Having 2 sets of dictionaries and one person asking, one person 10 definitions, another person 10 definitions, or ways of classifying things, I found really helpful. So I hope that's a useful way to at least start your preparation. What you'll find towards the end of your Viva practice is that you'll have a pretty good idea of what a Viva involves if you've done enough Vivas. And you can start making up Vivas on the fly from your own notes. So sometimes people would say, we're out of Vivas, what you want to do? And I would say, okay, well, I'll just make up a Viva on blah, and just go to my own notes and have a bit of a look, and then, I would know what are the topics that are going to come up, what are the curly questions they're going to ask and things. And you sort of get a bit more familiar with how the dance of the Viva goes, and until you're sort of fluent in it. And then hopefully on the day you can pull it off. So that's kind of how it works.
And that's such an important skill. I tell everyone here as well, is that being an examiner and actually knowing how the structure of a Viva flows, or as you said, the roadmap of a Viva is really, really important, because that actually helps you understand, being the trainee being asked the Viva, where it's going to be heading to.